the audiobook's hub creator here. I present the life-changing 1922 book by French philosopher Émile Coué, summarized in this full audiobook. Coué reveals his powerful technique of conscious autosuggestion, using imagination and affirmations to transform thought into reality. Let's begin unlocking our potential through Émile Coué's revolutionary system. I'll be sharing key insights from each chapter in this classic guide to conscious creation through intentional thought and imagination. Subscribe for the full series as we master self through autosuggestion. Now, let's start rewriting our futures.
Have you ever felt that the key to overcoming your challenges and achieving your dreams might be in your own mind? Immerse yourself in a transformative journey towards self-discovery and personal empowerment. We invite you to explore the unlimited power of your thoughts to shape your reality and improve your life in every aspect. Discover how the simple words you repeat to yourself can trigger significant changes in your health, well-being, and success. You will learn simple, practical techniques that you can apply daily to foster a more positive attitude and a healthier, happier life. This approach, based on proven psychological principles, has helped millions overcome obstacles and live the life they want and deserve. Imagine unlocking a happier, healthier, and more successful version of yourself. With just a few minutes a day, you can begin to transform your thoughts and, in turn, transform your life. Get ready to embark on an adventure to personal wellness and success. Through inspiring stories, practical exercises, and timeless wisdom, you will be equipped with the tools you need to build a more rewarding and meaningful life. Don't wait for the world to change for you. Change your world from within. Begin your journey to a fuller, more fulfilled life today. With each page you turn, you will move closer to being the architect of your own destiny, learning to use the power of your mind to create the reality you've always wanted. Self-mastery through conscious autosuggestion. Émile Coué. Introduction. In this manual, Émile Coué, a French pharmacist of the first half of the 20th century, teaches us how to gain power through autosuggestion. He is a pioneer of the new thought and has been quoted and plagiarized for almost a century. Hundreds of works have presented with small variations, or sometimes not so much, his ideas. In particular, his famous phrase, "Every day, from every point of view, I am getting better and better." This phrase appears in different self-help books and even forms part of the lyrics of a song by John Lennon, "Beautiful Boy." Some concepts may sound old-fashioned, but with a little goodwill and willingness to learn, one can overlook them or translate them into contemporary terms. Then you can take the rich teachings and begin to apply them immediately. There is much repetition in the text, but it is a way of looking at these ideas, which even today may sound advanced, from various angles in different contexts. I enthusiastically invite the reader to study and put into practice these valuable teachings, which will surely modify all areas of their daily life, where they are applied. Chapter 1. The Method. Suggestion, or rather autosuggestion, is a recent subject, but as old as the world. It is a new subject in the sense that, up to the present, it has been little studied and, consequently, also little known. It is old because it dates back to the time when man appeared on Earth. Indeed, autosuggestion is an instrument that we possess at birth, and this instrument, or rather this force, is endowed with an unprecedented and incalculable power, so that, depending on the circumstances, it will produce the best or the worst effects. The knowledge of this force is not only useful for each of us in general, but, in particular, it is indispensable for doctors, magistrates, lawyers, youth educators, parents, etc. When it is consciously put into practice, it avoids, in principle, to provoke in others autosuggestions that, because harmful, can lead to disasters, and on the other hand can, with the conscious use of the same, cause goods that bring physical health to the sick, moral health to neurotics, unconscious victims of previous autosuggestions, and especially to people who have a tendency to mix with the unpleasant. The conscious being and the unconscious being. To understand the phenomena of suggestion, or, to speak more precisely, of autosuggestion, it is necessary to know that in us there are two individuals, absolutely different from each other. Both are intelligent, but while one is conscious, the other is unconscious. This unconscious state is the reason why the existence of this being goes generally unnoticed. However, it is easy to verify this existence as soon as one takes the trouble to examine certain phenomena and to reflect on them for a few moments. Here are a few examples. Everyone knows sleepwalking. We know that a sleepwalker gets up at night without waking up, that he leaves his room after getting dressed, goes downstairs, crosses corridors, and, after performing certain acts or finishing certain works, returns to his room and goes to bed again. In the morning he shows his greatest surprise. When he wakes up, he finds finished a work that he had left unfinished the day before. He does not know that it was he who did it. To what force does his body obey but to an unconscious force, to his unconscious being? Let us now consider, if you will, the very frequent case of an alcoholic attacked by delirium tremens. As a prey of an attack of madness, he takes any weapon, a knife, axe, or hammer, and hits furiously those who have the misfortune to be around him. When the access is over, the man comes to himself, contemplates with horror the massacre that is offered to his sight, without knowing that he himself is the author. Is it not the unconscious that has ordered this discomfort? If we compare the conscious being with the unconscious being, we find that, while the conscious being is endowed with an unreliable memory, the unconscious, on the contrary, is endowed with an excellent and impeccable memory. It records, to our regret, the smallest events, the smallest facts of our existence. Moreover, it is credulous and accepts without reasoning what it is told. And as it is the one that presides over the functioning of all our organs through the brain, it has produced the fact that, which will be paradoxical to you, this or that organ works well or poorly, or to feel this or that impression, which determines our daily chores. The unconscious not only presides over the functions of our organism, but also over the fulfillment of all our actions, whatever they may be. What we call imagination, and which, contrary to what is admitted, always makes us work, even against our will, is the unconscious. Will and imagination. If we open a dictionary and look up the meaning of the term will, we will find this definition: faculty of freely determining our acts. We accept this definition as true and unimpeachable. Now, nothing is more falsy, and this will, which we claim so proudly, always gives way to imagination. This is an absolute law, that is to say, it suffers no exception, and to convince yourself, open your eyes, look around you, and understand what you see. You will realize then that what I tell you is not a theory founded by a sick brain, but the simple expression of what is. Suppose we place in the sun a plate 10 meters long and 25 meters wide. It is obvious that everyone will be able to go from one side of this plate to the other without stumbling. Let us change the conditions of the experiment, and let us suppose that this plate is placed at the height of the towers of a cathedral. Who is then capable of advancing at least 1 meter on such a narrow path? Practically no one, no doubt. You would not take 2 steps without trembling, and that, in spite of all your efforts of will, you would fall infallibly to the ground. Why then, if the board is on the ground, why would you not fall? And why would you fall if it is high up? Simply because, in the first case, you imagine that it is easy to go to the other end of the plank, while, in the second, you imagine that you cannot. You may want to move forward, but if you imagine you can't, you are left in the absolute impossibility of doing so. If the workers, carpenters, are able to perform such an action, it is because they imagine that they can. Vertigo has no other cause than the image of fall that we make ourselves. This image is immediately transformed into act, in spite of all our efforts of will. These unconscious images are much faster than the intensity of our efforts. Let us think of a person affected by insomnia. If he does not make any effort to sleep, he will remain quiet in his bed. If, on the contrary, he wants to sleep, the more effort he makes, the more he trembles, the less he falls asleep. Have you not noticed that when you think you have forgotten a name, when you try to remember it, it escapes you, while, when you replace in your mind such an idea with this other one, I will remember, the name appears without the slightest effort. Those who ride bicycles remember their first attempts. They were riding down the street and afraid of falling. They would grab the wheel, and from one moment to another, They would notice in the middle of the roadway a horse or a simple pebble, and they would seek to dodge the obstacle. But the more effort they made to avoid it, the more directly they went towards it. Who did not have that mad laugh, that laugh which the more effort they make to avoid it, the more violent it is? What was the thought of each one in such different circumstances? I want not to fall down. I want to find out the name of, but I can't. I want to avoid the obstacle, but I can't. I want to hold back laughter, but I can't. As can be seen, in each of these conflicts, it is always the imagination that dominates over the will, without exception. In the same vein, do we not know that a troop leader who rushes forward at the head of the group trains his troop to always go behind him, while if he shouts, "Every man for himself," almost fatally determines failure? Why? In the first case, the troop imagines that he must walk forward at the head of his troop, while in the second, he imagines that he is defeated and that it is necessary to flee to escape death. Panurge was not unaware of the contagion of example, that is, the action of imagination, when, to take revenge on a merchant with whom he sailed, he bought the best lamb and threw it into the sea, so that the other lambs followed him, with none left to the enemy. Human beings, we are more or less like lambs, and, to our regret, we irresistibly follow the example of another, imagining that we cannot do otherwise. I could cite many examples, but I think such an enumeration is unnecessary. I will not pass over in silence, however, the fact of the enormous power presented by the imagination, that is, the power of the unconscious, in the struggle against the will. There are drinkers who would like to stop drinking, but who cannot prevent themselves from doing so. You can ask them and they will answer you, in all sincerity, that they would like to be sober, that drinking exhausts them, but that they are irresistibly impelled to drink, in spite of their will, in spite of the evil they know it will do them. Even certain criminals commit their misdeeds in spite of themselves, and when you ask them why, they answer, "I could not help it. It was more powerful. It was stronger than me." And the drinker and the criminal tell the truth. They are trained to do what they do for the sole reason that they imagine they cannot not do it. Thus we, who are so proud of our will, who think we are so free in what we do, are but poor puppets whose strings our imagination pulls. We will not cease to be such puppets until we have learned to control our imagination. Suggestion and auto-suggestion. After the above, we can compare the imagination to a torrent, which eventually carries discomfort and which, despite our will to cross the river, has been dropped into it. That torrent seems indomitable. On the other hand, if you know how to take it, you will divert its course, you will lead it to the factory, and there, you will transform it into force, into movement, into heat, into electricity. If this comparison does not seem to you sufficient, let us then compare the imagination with a wild horse which has neither guide nor bridle. What can the rider who rides it do but let himself be led wherever the horse pleases, and following, then, if it rears up, it is in the pit where he stops his race. But what if the rider has just put brakes on his horse and the roles have changed? It is not the horse that goes where he wants, it is the rider who makes his horse follow him along the route he wants. Now that we are grasping the enormous force of the unconscious or imaginative being, I will show you that this being, considered as indomitable, can also be tamed as easily as a torrent or a wild horse. But before proceeding further, it is necessary to define carefully two words which we often employ without knowing with certainty what they mean. These words are suggestion and auto-suggestion. What does suggestion mean? It can be defined as the action of imposing an idea on the brain of a person. Does this action really exist? Properly speaking, no. Suggestion does not exist by itself. Indeed, it does not exist and cannot exist, except on condition of becoming the subject of auto-suggestion. And this word auto-suggestion, we define it as the implantation of an idea in oneself by oneself. You can suggest something to someone. If the unconscious of the latter does not accept such a suggestion, if he does not digest it, so to speak, to transform it into auto-suggestion, it produces no effect. Sometimes it has happened to me to suggest something banal to ordinarily obedient subjects, and to see my suggestion fail. The reason for this is that the unconscious of such subjects has refused to accept my suggestion and does not transform it into auto-suggestion. Use of auto-suggestion. I return to the place where I said that we can tame and direct our imagination as one directs a torrent or tames a horse. It is enough to know that this is possible, something that almost everybody ignores, and then to know how to make it possible. And well, this mode is very simple. It is the one that, without wanting it, without knowing it, in an absolutely unconscious way on our part, we use badly and, for this reason, often of our mother. This mode is the unconscious auto-suggestion, whereas if habitually one auto-suggests unconsciously, it is enough to change and auto-suggest consciously, and the procedure consists of this. First, to think with one's reason, the thing to be the object of auto-suggestion. Second, depending on whether one answers yes or no, repeat many times without thinking of anything else. This will be, or this happens, etc. And if the unconscious accepts this suggestion, if it auto-suggests, the desired will be realized point by point. Thus understood, auto-suggestion is nothing else than hypnotism as I understand it, and as I define it, by simple conscious auto-suggestion. I know that generally one passes for a madman in the eyes of the world when one dares to utter ideas which the majority of beings are not accustomed to understand. In short, auto-suggestion is the influence of the imagination on the moral and physical being of man. This action is undeniable, and without returning to the preceding examples, I will cite some others. If you persuade yourself that you can do anything, holding that it is possible, you will do it however difficult it may be. But if, on the contrary, you imagine that you cannot do the simplest thing in the world, it will be impossible for you to do it, and the obstacles will seem to you insurmountable mountains. Such is the case of neurasthenics who, believing themselves incapable of the slightest effort, often find themselves unable to do anything without suffering extreme fatigue. And these same neurasthenics, when they make efforts to get out of their sadness, sink lower and lower. They seem unhappy and collapse, and sink deeper and deeper the more effort they make to save themselves. It is not enough to think that a pain goes away to feel that. In effect, this pain disappears little by little, and conversely, it is enough to think that one suffers to feel immediately the suffering that comes. I know certain people who predict, under certain circumstances, that they will have a migraine this or that day, and indeed, on the predicted day, under the given circumstances, they feel it. They themselves provoke the pain as well as others, or they themselves, if they wish, are cured. And well, at the risk of passing for crazy, I will say that if many people are morally and physically sick, it is because they imagine themselves to be sick, either morally or physically. If some people are paralyzed without any injury, it is because they imagine themselves to be paralyzed, and it is in these people where extraordinary healings occur. If some people are happy or unhappy, it is because they imagine themselves to be happy or unhappy, because two people placed in exactly the same conditions can find themselves, the one perfectly well and the other absolutely bad. Depression, stuttering, phobias, kleptomania, some paralysis, etc., are nothing but the result of the action of the unconscious on the physical or moral being. But if our unconscious is the source of many of our evils, it can also produce the healing of our moral and physical affections. It can not only repair the evil it has done, but even cure real diseases. So great is its action on our organism. Lock yourself in a room, sit in a chair, close your eyes to avoid any distraction, and think just a few moments. If you really auto-suggested, that is to say, if your unconscious made yours the idea that you offered him, then you will be surprised to see occur such a thing that you thought. We must keep in mind that the characteristic of auto-suggested ideas is to exist in us at our expense, and we do not know about them, but for the effects they produce. But above all, and this recommendation is essential, the will does not intervene in the practice of auto-suggestion, for if it does not agree with the imagination, that is to say, if you think, for example, I want such and such a thing to happen, and the imagination says, You want it, but it is not possible. Not only do you not get what you want, but you get exactly the opposite. This observation is capital and explains why the results are so unsatisfactory when, in the treatment of moral affections, we try to do the re-education of the will. It is in the education of the imagination where one must be attentive, and it is thanks to this nuance that my method has succeeded where others, and not a few, have failed. From numerous experiences which I have carried out daily for 20 years, and which I have observed with meticulous attention, I have been able to draw the following conclusions, and which I summarize in the form of laws. When the will and the imagination are in struggle, it is always the imagination that wins without exception. In the conflict between the will and the imagination, the strength of the imagination is in direct proportion to the square of the will. When the will and the imagination agree, the one does not add to the other, but the one is multiplied by the other. The imagination can be impelled. The expressions, in direct proportion to the square of the will, and they multiply, are not rigorously exact. It is simply an image which is intended to make my thought understood. From what has just been said, it would seem that no one should ever be sick. This is true. Every disease, almost without exception, usually yields to autosuggestion, however bold and implausible as my statement may seem. I do not say that it always yields, but that it may yield, which is different. To bring people to practice conscious autosuggestion, it is necessary to teach how to do it, and it is done as one learns to read and write, or as one teaches music and so on. Autosuggestion is, as I said before, an instrument that we bring with us at birth and with which we play, unconsciously all our lives, just as a baby plays with a rattle. But it is a dangerous instrument. It can hurt us and even kill us if you use it recklessly and unconsciously. On the contrary, it will save us when we know how to use it consciously. You can say about it the same thing that Aesop said about language. It is the best and, at the same time, the worst thing in the world. Now I will explain to you how you can make everybody feel the beneficial action of autosuggestion consciously applied. In saying everybody, I exaggerate a little, for there are two classes of people in whom it is difficult to provoke conscious autosuggestion: the retarded who are not able to understand what they are told, and people who fail to learn. The mode of proceeding of a subject to learn the subject for autosuggestion, the principle of the method, is summarized in a few words. You can only think of one thing at a time, i.e., two ideas may resemble each other, but not overlap in our thinking. The first idea that occupies our thought is realized, for it has the tendency to transform itself into an act. Thus, if one comes to think of a sick person, that his suffering will disappear, the disease will vanish. If we think that a kleptomaniac will not make a mistake again, then he will not do it anymore, etc. How to proceed so that the suggestion is curative. Whatever the affection of the subject, physical or moral, it is necessary to proceed always in the same way and pronounce the same words with some variations according to the cases. Say to the subject, sit down and close your eyes. Do not try to make him sleep. It is useless. I beg you to simply close your eyes so that your attention is not distracted by objects which enter your visual field. Now say, all the words that I am going to pronounce are going to be fixed, printed, engraved, embedded in his brain. They must be fixed, imprinted, and embedded. Even if you do not want or do not know how, they are going to be fixed in a totally unconscious way on your part, and your organism and yourself you must obey. I tell you in principle that every day, 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, at mealtime, you will be hungry and you will say to yourself, I will eat with pleasure, and indeed you will eat with pleasure. You will be careful to chew your food slowly, in such a way that you will transform it into a kind of soft paste, which you will digest with pleasure. In these conditions, you will digest well, and you will not feel any pain. The assimilation will be done correctly, and your organism will prefer your food to make blood, muscle, strength, energy, in a word, life. As you have digested well, the intestinal function will be fulfilled normally, and every morning when you wake up, you will experience the need to evacuate and, without having to use any medication, without resorting to any artifice, you will get a satisfactory result. In addition, every night, from the moment you want to go to sleep until the moment you want to wake up the next morning, you will sleep in a deep sleep, calm, peaceful, during which you will not have nightmares, sleep from which you will be in full mood. On the other hand, from now on, if it comes to you from being sad, collapsed, fatigued, angry, it will no longer be so, and instead, you will be happy. It is possible to be happy without any reason, even happy, just as it was possible to be sad without any reason. I will tell you more. Even if you have real motives and reasons to be bored and distressed, you will not be bored and distressed. If moments of impatience or anger come upon you, you will not make such movements. You will not have them anymore. On the contrary, you will always be patient, always masters of yourselves, and the things that make you angry will become indifferent to you, and you will become calm, very calm. If you are ever assailed by hatreds, which continue with unhealthy ideas, fears, terrors, phobias, temptations, and bitterness, I wish that all that, in the eyes of your imagination, will gradually move away from you, and that seems to melt and get lost as in a distant cloud, in which everything has to end up disappearing completely, just as upon awakening, a dream evaporates. I wish that all your organs work well, that the heart be beating normally, that the blood circulation occurs as it should, that the lungs work well, that the stomach, intestine, liver, kidneys, and bladder can perform their functions normally. If any of them function abnormally, this anomaly disappears day by day, so that in a short time will have disappeared completely, and this organ will have resumed its normal function. Moreover, if there is any injury to any of them, these injuries heal day by day and will heal quickly. In connection with this, I should say that it is not necessary to know which organ is diseased in order to be cured by the influence of autosuggestion. One can repeat to oneself, every day, under all points of view, I go from better to better, and the unconscious will exert its action on that organ which he himself will know how to discern very well. Moreover, I add one very important thing. If up to the present you have experienced before yourselves a certain distrust about something, I tell you that this distrust will disappear little by little, leaving in its place, on the contrary, confidence in yourselves, based on this force of incalculable power which is in each of us. This confidence is something absolutely indispensable in every human being. Without confidence in yourself, you achieve nothing. With confidence in yourself, you can achieve everything. In the domain of reasonable things, of course. You take confidence in yourself, and then confidence gives you the certainty that you are able to do not only well, but very well, all the things you want to do. As long as all those things are reasonable, then you can do them. So, when you decide to do something reasonable, when you have to do a thing that it is your duty to do, always think that the thing is easy. Let the words difficult and impossible, I can't, and it is stronger than me, I can't stop myself from doing such and such a thing, disappear from your vocabulary. What should be in your vocabulary is, it is easy, I can. If you consider that the thing is easy, it will become easy for you, while to others, it will continue to seem difficult. So you will do these things quickly, you will do them well, and without fatigue, because you do them without effort. Whereas if you had considered them difficult or impossible, they would become difficult for you, simply because you considered them so. To these general suggestions, which may seem a little long, and even some of them childish but no less necessary, we must add those that apply to the particular case of the subject you have in hand. All these suggestions should be made in a monotonous and lulling tone, accentuating the essential words, that invites the subject, if not to sleep, at least to remain calm, to think of nothing. Once the series of suggestions is over, one addresses the subject cheerfully, but without emotion, in the following terms. In short, I hope that from all points of view, both from the physical and moral point of view, you will enjoy excellent health, better than you have enjoyed so far. Now I will count to 3, and when I say 3, you will open your eyes, and you will come out of the state in which you were with much peace, and you will not have the least fatigue nor the least discomfort. On the contrary, you will feel strong, vigorous, willing, and full of life, Indeed, you will be cheerful, very cheerful, and mastering all your affairs. 1, 2, 3. At the word 3, the subject opens his eyes and smiles, always with an expression of contentment and well-being on his face. How to practice conscious auto-suggestion. Every morning when you get up, and every evening when you go to bed, close your eyes and, without pretending to fix your attention on what is being said to you, pronounce with your lips, loud enough to hear your own words. And counting in a loop provided with 20 knots, say the following sentence: every day, under any point of view, I go better and better. The words "under any point of view" are addressed to all. It is useless to make particular suggestions. This suggestion, in the simplest possible way, even childish and machine-like, and therefore, without the slightest effort, is more effective. In a word, the formula should be repeated, with the tone used to recite the litanies. In this way, it is possible to make this message penetrate in the unconscious, through the ear, and when this message has penetrated, irremediably, it acts. To follow this method, all one's life is both preventive and curative. In addition, every time that in the course of the day or night you feel a physical or moral suffering, immediately affirm in yourself that you will make it disappear. Then isolate yourself as much as possible, close your eyes, and pass your hand over your forehead if it is something moral, or over the painful part if it is something physical. Repeat rapidly with the lips the words pass, heal, cure, etc., as long as necessary. With a little practice, the moral or physical pain will disappear after 20 to 25 seconds. Start again every time it is necessary. Then it is easy to realize the role of the suggester. He is not a teacher who orders, he is a friend, a guide, who leads the patient step by step on his way to healing. As all these suggestions are given in the interest of the patient's unconscious only requires to assimilate them and transform them into auto-suggestion. When this is done, healing is obtained more or less quickly. The practice of auto-suggestion does not replace medical treatment, but it is a precious aid, both for the patient and for the physician. Chapter 2. The superiority of the method. Of course, this method gives absolutely wonderful results. It is easy to understand why. Indeed, doing it as I suggest, there are no failures, ever, except with the two categories of persons of whom I spoke before and who, happily, represent scarcely 3% of the mass. The test on extremely sensitive subjects can be done initially without explanations, although such subjects are few. Formerly, imagining that suggestion could only be obtained during sleep, I always tried to put my subject to sleep, but having ascertained that this was not indispensable, I ceased to do so, to spare him the fear which he almost always experiences when he is told that he is to be put to sleep. Fear that makes him oppose, in spite of himself, an involuntary resistance to sleep. If, on the contrary, you tell him that you do not want to put him to sleep because it is totally useless, you will gain his confidence and he will listen to you without fear, without ulterior motives, and often falls asleep, if not at first, at least very quickly. As if lulled to sleep by the monotonous sound of your voice, with a deep sleep, from which he wakes up amazed to have fallen asleep. If there are among them unbelievers, and I am sure there are, I simply say to them, "Come to my house, see, and you will be convinced by the facts." As I have just said, it is not necessary to believe in order to proceed to employ suggestion and determine auto-suggestion. People can be suggested, not only with procedures, and in fact, when they have just been told that their disease is incurable and that they are going to die, a suggestion has already been provoked in their mind with disastrous consequences. If, on the other hand, they are told that the disease, even if it is serious, with care, time and patience will get the cure, then you can get surprising results more often. Another example, when a doctor, after examining his patient, writes a prescription and gives it to him without comment, the drugs prescribed will have little chance of success. Whereas if the doctor explains to his patient that this or that medicine must be taken in this or that condition to produce this or that effect, almost infallibly, the announced results will be obtained. If among my readers there are doctors or pharmacists, do not think that I am their enemy. On the contrary, I am their best friend. On the other hand, I would like to see the theoretical and practical study of suggestion included in the curricula of medical schools for the greater welfare of patients and of the doctors themselves. And on the other hand, I believe that every time a sick person goes to consult a doctor, he should always ask for one or many drugs, even if they are not necessary. The sick, in fact, when he goes to the doctor, he goes to be prescribed the medicine that will cure him. He does not know that, most of the time, it is hygiene and regimen that works, which is given so little importance. It is a medicine that he is missing. In my opinion, if the doctor only prescribes his patient a regimen without any medicine, the patient will be dissatisfied and will say to himself that it was useless to worry, so that he was not prescribed anything, and will go to see another doctor. It seems to me then that the doctor should always prescribe specialized drugs for which so much is demanded, and which are often only worthwhile because of the publicity given to them, but which inspire in the patient more confidence than pills X or ointments Y, which can be easily obtained at the pharmacy without a prescription. How does suggestion work? To understand the role of suggestion, or rather autosuggestion, it is enough to know that the unconscious is the great director of all our functions. Let us make him believe, as I said before, that such an organ that does not work well must work well. It instantly transmits him the order, and docilely obeys. Its function is normalized, either immediately or gradually. This allows to explain in a simple and clear way how by suggestion you can stop bleeding, overcome constipation, make fibroids disappear, cure paralysis, cure tubercular lesions, heal varicose wounds, etc. I will take as an example the case of a dental hemorrhage, a case I was able to observe in the office of Émile Coué, dentiste in Troyes. A young woman whom I had helped to cure of an asthma, which had lasted 8 years after the first outbreak, told me one day that she wanted to have a tooth extracted. As I knew she was very sensitive, I offered to extract it painlessly. Naturally, she accepted, not without pleasure, and we made an appointment with the dentist. On the appointed day, we met at the dentist, and in front of her, I told her, "You will feel nothing, etc." And continuing with my suggestion, I signaled the dentist. A moment later, the dentist got up, without Miss D had blinked. As often happens, bleeding starts. Instead of using any hemostatic, I told the dentist to try the suggestion, not knowing beforehand what would happen. I begged then Miss D look at me, and I suggested that in 2 minutes the bleeding would stop on its own, and we waited. The young lady spat out some bloody saliva, and then nothing else. I told her to open her mouth. We looked and discovered that a lump of blood had formed in the dental cavity. How to explain such a phenomenon in the simplest way? Under the influence of the idea, the hemorrhage must stop. The unconscious had sent the arterials and the queens of order not to let the blood escape, and meekly they contracted in a natural way, just as they would have done it artificially, on contact with a hemostatic such as adrenaline, for example. The same reasoning allows us to understand how a myoma can disappear. The unconscious, having accepted the idea, makes the myoma disappear. The brain orders the arteries that feed it to contract. These contract, refuse their services, and no longer feed the myoma. Then this, deprived of nourishment, dies, falls apart, is reabsorbed, and disappears. Use of suggestion for the cure of affections and moral defects. Depression, so frequent in our days, generally yields to suggestion, regularly practiced in the way I indicate. I had the good fortune to contribute to the cure of a large number of neurasthenics whom no treatment had helped. One of them even spent a month in a special establishment in Luxembourg without any improvement. In 6 weeks, he was completely cured and is now a happy man after having thought himself the unhappiest man in the world. And he never returned to that or any other disease, for I taught him conscious autosuggestion, and he knows how to practice it wonderfully. But if suggestion is useful in the treatment of the moral and physical affections, what greater service could it render in transforming into honest persons the children who populate the houses of correction and who only come out of them to enter the army of crime? Let it not be said to me that this is impossible. It is possible, and I can prove it. I will cite the following two cases which are characteristic, but here I must open a parenthesis. In order that you may understand well the way in which suggestion acts, in the treatment of moral defects, I will make use of the following comparison. Let us suppose that our brain is a plate on which are pressed points, representing our ideas, habits, instincts, which determine our actions. If we ascertain that there exists in each individual an absurd idea, a harmful habit, an inadequate instinct, in short, a diseased point, we take an organized idea, a healthy habit, the right instinct, and give it a blow, that is to say, a suggestion. This point will be pressed for a millimeter, say, while the old one will cease. At each new suggestive stroke, another millimeter more will be pressed, and the old one will cease another millimeter, so that after a certain number of suggestive strokes, the old point will be replaced by the new one. This substitution operates. The individual obeys it. I return to my examples. Young M was 11 years old and lived in Troy. He was the object, day and night, of certain little accidents inherent in early childhood. He was also a kleptomaniac and a liar by nature. At his mother's request, I gave him suggestion. From the first session, the accidents ceased during the day but continued during the night. Gradually, they became less frequent, and finally, a few months later, the little boy was completely cured. At the same time, the passion for stealing diminished, and by the end of the 6th month, he was no longer stealing. The brother of this child, aged 18, had conceived against another of his brothers a violent hatred. Every time he drank a little too much, he felt the urge to cut his brother with a spoon. He felt that it would happen someday, and at the same time that after his crime, he would bleed to death on the body of his victim. I also made the suggestion. The result was wonderful. From the first session, he was cured and his hatred for his brother disappeared, and then they were very good friends, trying to collaborate with each other. I followed him for some time, and the healing always persisted, taking more than 50% on the most suitable path. When such results are obtained by suggestion, it seems not only useful, but indispensable to adopt this method and introduce it into houses of correction. I am sure that, with daily and proper suggestion, applied to vicious children, it would be possible to lead more than 50% by a less injurious path. Would not this render an immense service to society by returning safe and sound many of the future citizens who would otherwise be injurious to it? It may perhaps be objected to me that the employment of suggestion is dangerous and may be used for evil. This objection is of no value, in principle, because the practice of suggestion would be entrusted to serious persons and honest men, to doctors of houses of correction, for instance, and others. Those who intend to avail themselves of it to do harm ask no one's permission. But even admitting that it offers some danger, which in reality is not possible, I would ask whoever would make this objection to tell me what we use that does not involve danger. Steam, electricity, automobiles, airplanes. Are not poisons what doctors and pharmacists we use daily in small doses, and that can tear apart the sick if in a moment of carelessness we are wrong to weigh the grams of this or that substance when preparing the medicine? Some cases of healing. This small work would be incomplete if it did not have some examples of healing. I will not cite all those in which I have intervened. It would be too long and tiring. I shall content myself with citing only a few of the most remarkable. MD of Troy has been suffering for 8 years from asthma, which obliges her to spend a great part of the night sitting up in bed, trying to fill her lungs, opposed to their function. Preliminary demonstrations show her very sensitive, immediate sleep, suggestion. From the first day, MD achieves an enormous improvement and spends a good night, interrupted only by an attack of asthma, which lasts a quarter of an hour. After a short time, the asthma disappears completely, with no further relapses. MM, a tailor worker, inhabitant of Saint-Sabine, near Troy, has been suffering for 2 years from lesions at the junction of the spinal column with the pelvis. The paralysis exists only in the lower limbs, which are swollen and congested, to the point of taking on a purplish color. Various treatments have been applied, including anti-syphilitics, without result. Preliminary explanations, clear. Suggestion on my part. Autosuggestion on the part of the subject for 8 hours. At the end of this time, there is an appreciable but imperceptible movement of the left leg. New suggestion. 8 hours later, noticeable improvement. From week to week, great improvement, progressive disappearance of the inflammation, etc. At the end of 11 months, the patient goes downstairs, walks 800 meters, and 6 months later, returns to the workshop where he has been working ever since, with no trace of paralysis. MAG, a resident of Troy, suffered for a long time from enteritis. Various treatments have failed to cure him. His state of mind is very bad. MG is sad, gloomy, unsociable, had suicidal ideas. Preliminary explanations. From the first day of suggestion, there was an appreciable result. For 3 months, daily suggestions at first, then more spaced out. At the end of this time, the cure is complete. The enteritis disappeared completely, and his mood became excellent. As this cure dates back 12 years, with no signs of relapse, it can be considered complete. It is a striking example of the effects that can be produced by autosuggestion as well as suggestion. All that he did with autosuggestion from the physical point of view, he did also from the psychic or moral point of view, with as good results in one case as in the other. So much so that his confidence in autosuggestion was increasing. As he was an excellent worker, he sought to procure the necessary tools in his trade of tailor in order to work at home on behalf of his employer. Some time later, a manufacturer, after seeing him work, entrusted him with the material he needed. MG, thanks to his skill, was able to produce more than the average worker. Delighted with such a result, the manufacturer entrusted him with more material, and then another and so on. So MG, who otherwise would have remained a simple workman if he had not had recourse to suggestion, now found himself at the head of 6 other craftsmen procuring good profits. Madame D of Troyes, about 30 years of age, suffers from beginnings of tuberculosis, suffers loss of weight daily in spite of overfeeding, cough, oppression, sputum. She seems too ill. However, after suggestion, she improves immediately. From the next day, morbid symptoms begin to decrease rapidly. After suggestion, she always has immediate improvement. The improvement appears day by day, more and more noticeable. The patient's weight increases rapidly, without the need for further overfeeding. After a few months, the cure seems complete. This person wrote to me 8 months after my departure from Troyes to thank me. She lets me know that she is pregnant and that she is behaving wonderfully. I have chosen these old cases intentionally to show that the cure is permanent. I would like to add, however, other more recent cases. MX, a postal employee in Luneville, lost a child in January. It triggers concussion, manifested in him by a nervous tremor. His uncle calls me in June. Preliminary explanations, then suggestion. 4 days later, the patient returned telling me that his tremor had disappeared. Another suggestion and an invitation to return 8 days later. Then a fortnight, then 3 weeks, then a month. End of news. Shortly after, his uncle arrives and says he has received a letter from his nephew. Everything is going well. He has returned to his job at the post office as a telegraph operator and has had to leave town. He sends him a letter of 70 words without the slightest difficulty. He says in his letter that he could have written you a much longer one. Since then, no relapse. MY from Nancy, neurasthenic for many years, phobias, terrors, stomach and intestinal malfunctions, insomnia, gloomy mood and suicidal ideas. When walking, he sways as if drunk and continually thinks about his discomfort. No treatment has helped him. His condition worsens. A month's asylum in a special home has no effect. MY comes to see me. I explain to the patient the mechanisms of autosuggestion and the existence in us of the conscious being and of the unconscious being, suggestion. For 2 or 3 days, MY remains a little disturbed by the explanations I have given him. After some time, the light comes to his spirit. He understood. I made him the suggestion and taught him to do it to himself, day after day. The improvement, slow at first, becomes more and more rapid, and after a month and a half, the cure is complete. The ex-sick man who considered himself the unhappiest of men is now happier. Not only has there been no relapse, but it will be impossible for him to relapse again, for MYBPs is convinced that he is out of it, is convinced that he has definitely come out of that state, and his wish is to spare him any such suffering. M.E. from Troy. Attacked with gout. The joint of the right foot is swollen and painful. It is impossible for him to walk. From the first suggestion, he can reach without the aid of his cane the carriage which will carry him. He no longer suffers. The next day he comes back as I had told him the day before. His wife comes alone and tells me that her husband got up that morning, put on his shoes, and went to visit his carvings by bicycle. This gentleman was a sculptor and painter. I did not ask any more about this sick man, and he did not have to come back to my house. After a long time I knew that he had not relapsed, but I do not know what else happened. Miss T from Nancy. Depressed, dyspepsia, gastralgia, enteritis, pains in different parts of the body. Has been treated for many years with negative results. Suggestion on my part. Daily auto-suggestion on her part. Sensible improvement from the first day without interruption. At present, this person has been cured for a long time, both physically and emotionally. She does not follow any diet. She thinks she still has some enteritis left, but she is not sure. Later, the patient comes back and tells me that his tremor has disappeared. Another suggestion and an invitation to come back 8 days later, then a fortnight, then 3 weeks, then a month. End of news. Miss X, sister of Miss T. Deep depression. Remains in bed for 15 days a month, unable to move and work. Inappetent, sad, digestive system malfunctioning. Cure in a single session. This treatment seems to have lasted a long time, for so far there has not been the slightest relapse. Miss H. de Malzeville. Generalized eczema, particularly intense on the left leg. Both legs inflamed, especially in the joints of the feet. Gait difficult, painful. Suggestion. The same evening, Miss H. can walk several miles without fatigue. The next morning, feet and joints are swollen and painless. The eczema disappears quickly. Mrs. P. de la Neuveville. Pain in the ankles and knees. Duration of 10 years, getting worse every day. Suggestion every day on my part, and auto-suggestion on yours. Improvement is immediate and increases progressively. The cure is fast and lasting. Mrs. Z. de Nancy had a pulmonary congestion with which she was referred to me 2 months later. General weakness, inappetence, poor digestion, rare and difficult stools, insomnia, and profuse night sweats. Since the first suggestion, the patient feels much better, and after 8 days she returns and tells me that she feels completely well. All traces of illness have disappeared, and the organic functions are fulfilled normally. 3 or 4 times she has been on the point of perspiring, but each time she avoids it by the use of conscious auto-suggestion. After that moment, Mrs. Z behaves wonderfully. MX, a teacher at Belfort, cannot speak for more than 10 minutes without becoming completely hoarse. Several doctors consulted do not find any lesion in the voice organs. One of them tells him that there is senility of the larynx, and this statement confirms him in the idea that he will never be cured. He comes to Nancy to spend the vacations. A lady who knew me advises him to come to my office, and he refuses at first. But finally he becomes aware, in spite of his absolute disbelief, of the effects of suggestion. I give him a suggestion and ask him to come back the next day. He returns the next day and tells me that he observes that he has talked all afternoon without becoming hoarse. 2 days later he returns and his aphonia has not reappeared. Sometime later, he tells me that he has not had aphonia again. Young B, he suffers from a very serious heart disease characterized by a particular murmur. His breathing is short and he can only walk with extremely short and slow steps. The examining physician, one of the best clinicians, predicts a rapid and fatal outcome. The patient leaves the hospital in February and does not improve. A friend of his family brings him to my house, and when I see how he looks, it makes me think he is lost. However, I give him hope, and after giving him the suggestion and recommending auto-suggestion, I tell him to come back the next day. When I go back to see him, I find to my great surprise that his breathing and gait have improved considerably. New suggestion. 2 days later, when he returns, the improvement has continued, and so it happens in each session. The progress is very rapid, so much so that 3 weeks after the first session, my little patient goes for a walk with his mother, up to the plateau of Villers, 3 km. He breathes freely, almost normally. He walks without wheezing and can climb stairs, which until then was impossible for him. The improvement continues day by day, and the young bee asked me at the end of May if he could go to his grandmother's house in Carignan. As I found him well, I advised him to do so. Then he leaves and gives me news from time to time. His health is getting better and better. He eats with appetite, digests well, assimilates food. Even the oppression has completely disappeared. He can not only walk like everyone else, but even run and go butterfly hunting. He comes back in October and I can hardly recognize him. The small, skinny, stooped man who had left me in May was now a big, straight boy with a face glowing with health. He gained 12 centimeters in height and 9 kilos in weight. Since then, he lives a normal life, walks up and down stairs, rides a bicycle, and plays soccer with his classmates. Mrs. X from Genoa, 13 years old. She has been suffering for a year and a half from a fever of tubercular origin, according to the opinion of many doctors. The fever resists various medical treatments. She was taken to Mr. Bauduy, a disciple of Dr. Coué, in Genoa. He made the suggestion and asked to take her to him after 8 hours. When she returned, the fever was cured. No relapses. Mrs. Z, also from Genoa, contracture of the left leg for 17 years, followed by an abscess above the knee due to an operation. The lady asked Mr. Baudouin to make a suggestion, and as soon as she started, the leg bent normally. There was certainly a psychic cause in this case. Mrs. U, 55 years old, from Maxeville, affected by varicose veins for more than a year and a half. First session in September 1915, second session 8 hours later. At the end of 15 days, complete cure. EC, 10 years old, refugee from Metz, Grande Rue, 19. Unknown affection of the heart, vegetations, blood from the mouth every night. Comes in July. After a few sessions, the blood begins to decrease. Improvement continues day by day. Until the end of November, the condition has completely disappeared. The vegetations no longer seem to exist. Mr. H, 48 years old, resident of Bryn, diagnosed with specific chronic bronchitis. Condition worsens day by day. He comes to my office. Immediate and continuous improvement since then. At present, without being completely cured, he is feeling better and better. For 24 years, Mr. B had been suffering from frontal sinusitis, for which he had undergone 11 operations, in spite of which the sinusitis persisted, accompanied by intolerable pain. The physical condition of the patient was pitiable, violent and almost continuous pains, lack of appetite, extreme weakness, inability to walk, read, sleep, etc. The spirit was not worth much more than the physical state, and despite treatments in Bernheim, in Nancy, in Desjardins, in Paris, in Dubois, in Bern, in Strasbourg, this condition not only persists, but worsens every day. The patient came to me in September on the advice of one of my clients. From that moment on, the evolution was rapid. Today, 10 years later, this gentleman behaves perfectly. It is a real resurrection. Mr. N, 18 years old, Celia Street, Pott's disease. His torso has been in a cast for 6 months. He follows the sessions regularly, twice a week, and does morning and evening the usual auto-suggestion. The improvement is very fast and the patient can remove the splint soon after. I saw him again later. He was completely cured and performed the duties of a messenger, then became a nurse in an ambulance at Nancy, where he remained until his retirement. Mr. D of Jarville, paralysis of the left upper eyelid. He was in the hospital where he had stings, after which the eyelid is held, but the left eye was more than 45 degrees to the outside. An operation seemed necessary. It is at that time that he returns home and that, thanks to autosuggestion, his eye returns little by little to its normal position. Mrs. L, in Nancy, interrupted pain on the right side of the face for more than 10 years. She visits numerous doctors and applies their prescriptions without any result. An operation is deemed necessary. The patient returns home, has an immediate improvement, and after 10 days the pain disappears completely. No relapse until the 20th of December of the same year. Maurice T., 8.5 years old, from Nancy, has Chapin's feet. A first operation cures him, but soon the right foot gets sick. 2 new operations, and they do not give any result. The child is brought to me for the first time in February. He walks quite well, thanks to 2 devices that control his feet. The first direct session improved him immediately, and after the second, the little one walked with ordinary shoes. The improvement is great. 3 years later, the child comes. His right foot is not very strong because of a fall he has suffered. Miss X at Blainville, left foot affected, probably of specific origin. A slight sprain has caused a swelling of the foot, accompanied by severe pain. Various treatments have had negative results. After some time, she is declared to be affected by a suppuration, which seems to indicate a bone problem. Walking becomes more and more difficult and painful in spite of the treatments followed. On the advice of a former patient who had been cured, she came to see me. From the first sessions, there was a noticeable improvement. Little by little, the swelling attenuates, the pain becomes less intense, the suppuration is weaker, and finally healing occurs. This process lasted a few months. Now the foot is almost normal. The pain and swelling have completely disappeared, which makes the patient stop. Mrs. R., in Chavigny, illness for 10 years. Comes at the end of July. Immediate improvement. Losses and pain decrease rapidly. On the following September 29th, no more pains, no more leakage. Menstrual flow, which lasted 8 to 10 days, ceases after 4 days. Mrs. G. in Nancy, 40 years old. Affected with varicose veins, treated according to her doctor's advice, without success. In the lower leg, the affection is enormous. The plaque the length of a 2-franc coin penetrates to the bone above the ankle. The swelling is intense, the suppuration abundant, and the pains extremely violent. The patient attended for the first time in April. The improvement that begins to manifest itself from the first session continues without interruption. On February 18, 1917, the leg is completely deflated. The pains and itching have disappeared. The lesion still exists, but it is no longer than a pea and is not more than 2 or 3 millimeters deep. It continues to suppurate, although slightly. In 1920, the cure is complete. Miss D. at Meyercourt, 16 years old. Nervous crises for 3 years. These crises, at first infrequent, appear more frequently. When she comes to see me, she had had 3 crises in the previous fortnight. Until April, no crisis had manifested itself. We can add that this young woman saw disappear, from the beginning, the headaches from which she suffered almost constantly. Mrs. M., 43 years old, Malzéville. She comes for violent headaches which she has suffered all her life. After a few sessions, the pains disappear completely. After a month, she notes the healing of a uterine descent, of which she had told me, and which she had not thought of when she made her autosuggestion. This result was due to the words, "from all points of view," contained in the formula, to be used morning and evening. Mrs. X, Choisy-le-Roi. A single general suggestion on my part in July, autosuggestion on her part, morning and evening. In October of the same year, this lady announces to me that she is cured of a uterine descent, from which she had been suffering for 20 years. 3 years later, the cure persists. Mrs. J, 60 years old, Rue des Dominicains. She comes in July for a violent pain in the right leg, accompanied by a considerable protuberance in the whole leg. She tries to walk and screams. After the session, to his great surprise, he walks normally without feeling the slightest pain. When she returns 4 days later, the pain has not returned, and the lump has disappeared. This lady indicates to me that after coming to my house, she was cured of the whitish discharge and of the enteritis, which she had been suffering from for a long time. Same observation as the previous one. At the November session, the cure persists. Miss GL, 15 years old, Rue du Montet. Stutterer since childhood. She comes on the 20th of July and sees that her stuttering ceases instantly. A month later, I see her again. Her cure persists. Mr. F, 60 years old, Rue de la Côte. For 5 years, rheumatic pains in the back and left leg. He walks with difficulty, leaning on a cane, and cannot raise his arms above his shoulders. He comes to see me. After the first session, the pains have completely disappeared, and the patient can not only walk with great strides, but even run. In addition, he can do a claw with both arms. In November, the healing persists. Mr. S., 48 years old, Bussière aux Dames. He came for the first time with a varicose plaque on the left leg of 15 years and as big as a piece of 5 francs. 8 days later, the plaque is healed. No relapse. Mrs. L., 63 years, Chemin des Sables. Pain in the face for 10 years. No treatment was effective and refuses an operation that is wanted to do. He comes to see me, and 4 days later, the pain has disappeared. The healing persists to this day. Mrs. M., Villevieille. Menstrual problems for 13 years, very painful menses on the 22nd or 23rd day, lasting from 10 to 12 days. First visit in November and returns regularly every week. Significant improvement after the first session. She continues to improve rapidly, and at the beginning of January, the menstrual problems have disappeared. The periods return more or less regularly and without suffering. A pain I had in my knee for 13 years has also disappeared. Mr. and Mrs. C., inhabitants of Ainville. Intermittent rheumatic pain in the right knee for 11 years. 5 years ago, more violent crises than usual. Leg swells from time to time, same as knee. Then the lower part atrophies, and the disease reduces her to walking very difficult, with the help of a cane and the support of someone. She comes for the first time in December. She walks without a cane. Then she no longer uses the support, although sometimes she does use the cane. Sometimes her knee hurts, but it is very mild. Chapter 3. What conclusion can be drawn from all this? The conclusion is simple and can be expressed in a few words. We possess in us a powerful and incalculable force that, when we manage it unconsciously, can sometimes harm us. On the contrary, if we direct it wisely and consciously, it will give us control over ourselves and allow us not only to help us out of certain difficulties, but also to help others who are ill, physically or morally. But better still, to live relatively happy, whatever the conditions in which we find ourselves. Finally, this force, well applied, can help the moral regeneration of those who have strayed from the right path. Education as it should be. Something that may seem paradoxical at first is that the education of the child should begin before birth. Indeed, if a woman pregnant for a few weeks has in her mind the idea that her child will bring into the world physical and moral qualities, such as she would wish to have had, and if she continues, during the time of gestation, making herself the same image, the child will probably have such qualities. Spartan women only begot sturdy sons who later became fearsome warriors, because their greatest desire was to give such men to the patria, while in Athens, women begot intellectual sons whose qualities of thought mattered 100 times more than physical qualities. The child thus procreated will then be able to easily accept the suggestions made to him and transform them into autosuggestion, which will later determine the behavior that he will present in his life. For it is necessary to know that all our words, all our acts are but the result of autosuggestions provoked, most of the time, by the suggestion of example and words. What should fathers and mothers do, then, in order not to provoke in their children harmful autosuggestions and to give birth in them the correct ones? Always be with them, in good humor, speak to them in a sweet tone, but nevertheless clear and serious. Thus induce them to obey, without even the temptation to resist. Above all, avoid brutalizing them, because you run the risk of determining in them autosuggestions of fear accompanied by hatred. Avoid also, say in front of them what is bad about other people, as is often done in classrooms where, without thinking, you destroy with words a good friend absent. Fatally, children underline such an example and could later cause real catastrophes. Awaken in children the desire to know the things of nature and to be interested in them, giving them clear explanations, using as much as possible a kind tone and good humor. Consequently, answer their questions with complacency, instead of telling them, "You bore me, leave me alone, or I'll explain it to you later." Under no pretext, never say to a child, "You are nothing but a bum, you are good for nothing," etc., because this would create difficulties in them, which they will later be reproached. If a child is lazy and does his homework badly, you have to tell him one day, even if it is not true, "Ah, today you have done your homework better than usual. That's good, my little one." The child flattered by such praise to which he is not accustomed will certainly work much better the next time, and little by little, thanks to the encouragement given with discernment, he will really come to work as well as he wishes. Avoid at all costs talk about diseases in front of children, a fact that could determine them. On the contrary, talk about health as something normal in man, and that the disease is an anomaly, a kind of malaise which can be avoided by living soberly and orderly. Do not create difficulties in children, teaching them to fear this or that, the cold, the heat, the rain, the wind, etc. Man is made to bear all this without effect, without suffering or complaining. The child should not be distressed by talking about the bogeyman or the werewolves, because the fear contracted in childhood is likely to persist later. For this reason, those who do not raise their children themselves should choose people they trust for this task. It is not enough that they love the children, but they must have qualities which awaken in them the right desires and reinforce those that they themselves forge. Awaken in children the love of work and study, making them accessible to them and explaining, as I have just said, things clearly and pleasantly, introducing in the explanations some witty anecdote, which provokes in the child the desire for the following lessons. Inculcate in them above all that work is indispensable to man, that he who does not work at something is useless, that all work brings to the one who does it healthy and deep satisfactions, while the idle, so dreamed of by some, becomes dull, depressed, and without taste for life, leading to failure and crime, for not possessing the means to satisfy the passions created by idleness. Teach children to be respectful and kind to all, and more particularly to those who, by chance of birth, are placed in classes inferior to their own, to respect the elderly, and not to make fun of the physical or moral defects which sometimes afflict the old. Teach them that you can love people without distinction of social position, that you have to be willing to help the needy and not be afraid to waste time or money to collaborate, that you have to worry about others as if it were for yourself. In short, try to experience without looking for it an intimate satisfaction which the selfish person seeks but never finds. To develop in children self-confidence, teaching them that, before doing something, they must submit it to the control of reason, avoiding acting impulsively, and that after having reasoned, they must make a decision on which they will not go back, unless they have the proof that they have been wrong. Teach them above all that each one should launch into life with the idea very precise, where he wants to get, and that, under the influence of this idea, he will arrive. Not that he should wait quietly for events, not that because he has formulated such an idea, he will know what to do to get it, and he will know how to choose the occasions or even the only occasion which will pass by him, while the one who doubts himself is the constant meta-trapper to which nothing goes well. He will be able to swim in an ocean of crazy ideas and will not find the way to achieve even one of them because he will always choose the occasions that will make him fail, while the one who has in himself the idea of success will give birth, sometimes unconsciously, the events that will lead him to success. But above all, parents and teachers must set an example. Children are extremely suggestive. Everything they see them do, they do it. That is why parents are obliged to set a good example to their children. From the time children learn to speak, make them repeat morning and evening 20 times in a row the phrase, "Every day, from all points of view I go from better to better." That will procure them an excellent physical and moral health. It powerfully helps the child to make his difficulties disappear and to develop the qualities to which he was opposed, suggesting the following to him. Every night in the dark approach the child's bed during his first sleep, the deepest. Stay 1 meter away from his head and in a low voice, so as not to wake him up, in a kind of murmur. Start suggesting him the dream, repeating slowly 5 or 6 times, "You sleep from better to better." Then, moving on to the suggestion itself, name for his unconscious the physical or moral improvement you wish to obtain, taking care to use only positive formulas. Do not do at first but 1 or 2 suggestions in a row, repeating them about 20 times, not passing to others, until you observe the results acquired, normally with the first ones. Examples of suggestions. First, for the mental to a lazy, fearful or lying child, do not say to him, "You are lazy, fearful or lying." Say to him, "You become industrious, lively, more and more frank and sincere." Second, for the physical, you have an appetite, your digestion goes better, your lungs are fortified, you become strong and you progress in your development. Third, for urinary incontinence, use words that the child can understand according to his age. A. To a small child, you call mum, and your potty will be next to you, clean. B. To an older child, you can hold it all night and your bed will always be dry and clean. If the child wakes up while being spoken to, stop immediately. It is better to start again the next day. The unconscious will continue to function after the words received, and parents will be surprised the results that can be obtained with this extremely simple procedure. It is easy to understand the reason. When the child sleeps, his body and his conscious being, at rest, are, so to speak, overridden, but his unconscious being keeps watch. It is to the latter that one has recourse, and being the very credulous, he accepts what he is told without discussion, and little by little the child comes to realize by himself what the parents wish. But above all, proceed with regularity, patience and perseverance. The results are rarely spontaneous. Warning: during the day, do not talk to the child or in front of him what you do while he sleeps. Finally, it would be desirable that every morning teachers direct their students' suggestion as follows. After making them close their eyes, they will say to them, "My friends, I hope you are respectful children, kind to the people around you, and obedient to the instructions given to you by your parents and teachers. And when they give you an order, be attentive to the instructions and take them into account when executing them. Sometimes you get angry when they give you an order, but now you will understand. You will understand that these orders are for your protection and benefit. Therefore, when you receive them, you will recognize in that person your desire to serve you and not to bother you. When they grow up, they will like to work, whatever the trade is. Now that they are studying, then they will like to study and the things they should study, even if they have been boring at other times. Then, when you are in class and the teacher gives you lessons, you will have your attention fixed only on what he tells you, without worrying about what your classmates do or say, and above all, without you saying or doing anything else other than studying. In these conditions, as you are intelligent because you are, my friends, you will easily understand, and memories are the things you have learned. These things are stored in a place in your memory where they will be at your disposal and from where you will get them when you need them. In the same way, when you work alone, whether at school or at home, when you do your homework or whatever you have to study, you will have your attention solely, exclusively on the work you are doing, and always in this way, you will get good results. Such are the counsels which, well followed, will give children better dispositions as to physical and moral qualities.
In our last session, we began uncovering Émile Coué's transformative technique of conscious autosuggestion for manifesting desires. Today, we dive deeper into the power of imagination and inner speech to break limiting patterns. Get ready to consciously shape your inner world and unlock your highest potential. Coué reveals how to harness affirmations, mental imagery, and repetition to retrain your mind. We'll learn practical ways to use suggestion to improve finances, relationships, confidence, and more. If you enjoyed the reality-bending wisdom so far, subscribe. We're just beginning to tap the well of Coué's teachings on imagination and the subconscious. Join me as we journey deeper into self-mastery through conscious autosuggestion. The freedom to recreate ourselves awaits as we apply this sacred psychology. Stay tuned as we transform our inner speech to realize the lives we desire. The mind's potential is infinite when we learn to harness it intentionally. Let's continue awakening new possibilities.